Welcome to another episode of The Recovering Liberal. I'm Tamara Young. I'm alive. I'm here. The podcast is still going. I haven't recorded an episode in about 3 weeks, and here's the problem with that. It turns out the progressive agenda is working out so swimmingly that there are so many crises that it's like I'm almost paralyzed trying to pick a direction to go next. Like you come back 3 weeks later and there's so much new. It's like pick a crisis, any crisis. Do you want to talk about the crisis in Ukraine and the closest we've ever been to nuclear conflict? Do you want to talk about the fentanyl crisis, the human trafficking crisis, the economic crisis? Really just pick your crisis. But what I've had on my heart really comes from, I've done a couple of interviews for other podcasts, and I've talked more kind of high level about what the recovering liberal is, kind of where it came from, my story around addiction and recovery, and kind of the parallels to my political awakening of sorts, and kind of where it's led me. And I talked a lot about how, the guiding principle I'm operating off of is I think the truth matters and understanding the facts really matter. And I know that sounds like a cliche. A lot of people, I think, say that. But what I mean by that is really, regardless of, whether or not the truth leaves us confused or bewildered as to where to go next, I still think it's important to talk about facts and to look beyond the rhetoric and beyond the narratives and beyond the agendas and look at what's really going on. How is this stuff really panning out for us? Because, I think that in this two-party system, unfortunately, we get boxed into an ideology. It's one or the other. Pick one or the other. And the kind of feeling or the implication that I had, at least, in my experience being part of the Democratic Party and decidedly liberal, was that, if I let down my defenses and let any other information penetrate my world, like, what does that mean? Where else is there for me to go? The opposite side? That doesn't make any sense. And I think people, on both sides are feeling that. And I think it's okay to, even if the truth leaves you going, kind of all of my options aren't ideal at this point in time. Like we're coming up on midterm elections, like they're here. And a lot of you may be feeling kind of the way I am, where in a lot of races you're like, I don't know that anybody really fully represents my anti-establishment, like true, like kind of libertarian / populist / whatever you want to call it, independent ideas. And everybody has kind of a different mix of priorities and information on which they base their votes. But I don't know. I just call me ideological, call me like optimistic, but I still think being in a position to understand the systems and the influences and the implications of various policies. And on this podcast, I'm talking a lot about progressive policies. Spoiler alert, tonight I'm talking about progressive policies and the results of those policies. I think it's important to start there. Even if, that starting point means, well, now I'm more confused as to who to vote for or what to do or how we can ever like fix this mess that we're in. And I don't know, I think that you're only able to do that if you can kind of keep both feet kind of planted firmly on the ground in the sense that like still live your life. Like things may be on fire in the world in many ways, but like I look around me and I have 2 beautiful children. I have a great husband. I have a beautiful life that comes with its own set of challenges and setbacks and struggles just like anybody else. But for the most part, life is really beautiful and it's really great. And at the same time, I think that I have some things about my life and certainly regarding my children's futures that I want to protect. And that's why I'm here. So let's dive into it. I'm kind of borrowing from something I've talked about recently on another podcast. And when that episode comes out, I'll probably post a clip on my channel It's a really cool podcast called Good Vibes Nation, where a right wing and a left wing those two people. I was trying to give them another title, but yeah, right wing and left wing. They're friends. That's their title. They're friends with each other, and they talk about politics. I promise. I promise you. And they're still friends. It's insane. But I was on their podcast and I was kind of talking about my recovery story, and so I kind of want to borrow from a principle that is totally stolen from kind of like 12-step worlds. And there's this phrase they use. They say principles before personalities. And what that means, it has a lot of different kind of applications, but at its core, it means the guiding principles of 12-step recovery always trump any person's like opinion or conflicts between people, even down to the level of like, if like somebody that you think is a trash person and you don't really like them or want any aspect of what they're sharing, like still can say something that is valuable to you. And still can say something that is true. And in the spirit of that, I'm kind of coming at this episode in a way that I'm calling reality over rhetoric. You can even say results over rhetoric. I think that what I've noticed of the Progressive Party that I lost taste for is a lot of the rhetoric serves as a front. And it's really a rhetoric that is very like morals and values driven almost. And it's kind of like a line in the sand rhetoric that makes you feel like if you're with us, you're good. If you're against us, you're the enemy of this good thing. That's how you feel. And it serves as a pretty effective moral pejorative and a good front for what's really happening behind the scenes, which is driving anything but the objective that rhetoric purports to solve. And I'm going to go through a few examples. I've talked a lot about COVID on this podcast, but I just want to kind of boil down the rhetoric and versus the reality that I'm talking about. Because I think that for me, getting through the progressive rhetoric and really understanding the agenda behind that particular issue, what the real results, like in real life, of those policies are yielding. And I don't know, you be the judge of whether or not they match up. In my experience, and along most of these, just going issue by issue along most of these lines, the delivery doesn't even begin to align with what the rhetoric says the goal is. So with COVID, a lot of the rhetoric, one of the big things that came out of it was follow the science, which is hilarious because what that kind of follow the science and it's the right thing to do, reporting results solely through the distorted lens of hospitalization and death numbers due to COVID at the total detriment and disregard of all other key metrics like, I don't know, all-cause mortality, adverse events, at the detriment of things that are important, like recognizing how the nuanced conversations of how we treat high-risk populations like old people and obese people should be different than how we treat healthy adults and healthy children. Total loss of respect for the fact that mRNA vaccines are new technology, and therefore ultimately missing the test of time. And so taking recommendations with a grain of salt in that respect. The reality of COVID is we lost healthy discourse. We lost respect for the views of multiple expert opinions. It was a total drowning out of common sense because the rhetoric was, it's the right thing to do to stop, we have to stop the virus at all costs. We have to lock down. We have to wear masks. We have to stop the education of our children. This is for the greater good. You have to get the vaccine because the virus stops with you. We have to stop the spread. And we were fed systematically these lies that reinforced the rhetoric. And by the time the lies were exposed, a lot of people, I'm sad to say, didn't really care that they were lied to because they were just glad that they were on the right side of the rhetoric. We followed the science. We did the right thing. And that's how a lot of people, I'm sad to say, still feel. But is it following the science when the best data we have, which is real life data over time, is showing that there's a big difference in high risk populations and not. That there's a big discrepancy in reporting when, hospital numbers were incentivized to report COVID deaths and hospitalizations. And, somebody who had a stroke 2 days after, and I know one of these people, someone had a stroke 2 days after getting their vaccine, wasn't even asked by the doctor. It never even came up, that they got the mRNA vaccine, despite the fact that now we're seeing reports of neurological events like strokes, of spike protein reactions, of people who are now immunocompromised. The killing of the lab leak theory as misinformation, when it's important for us to understand what happened in the case of this pandemic in order to prevent it from happening again in the future. But that was effectively stifled, and in fact demonized. So what do we mean by follow the science? It's just rhetoric. It's just rhetoric, and it's just a front for do exactly what you're told without asking questions. Meanwhile, we have, viewed COVID through a pretty singular lens, which is we stop the virus. And that has trumped all other concerns to the detriment of our economy, to the detriment of overall health of our world population, really, especially in mRNA vaccinated countries, to the detriment of now we're seeing all-cause mortality rates and birth rates, to the detriment of the education of our children. In some cities, like some children aren't even literate at this point. Illiteracy, is that a word? That's ironic that I'm asking that when I'm talking about literacy. But it's going up, whatever the word is. Not to mention mental health effects of lockdown policies, and vaccine coercion, people who lost their jobs because they wouldn't get vaccinated. I had a friend tell me recently, he's like, yeah, but that, like, vaccine mandates, people were talking about that in passports and stuff. It never happened. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, have you talked to, I just talked to another person recently who just served his last, after a 15-year career in the military, just left the military. People lost their jobs. People lost their jobs. Okay, people were prevented from participating freely in society. You couldn't go on a cruise if you hadn't been vaccinated. So who benefited from this particular rhetoric? Major corporations. So Big Pharma got insanely richer, billions and billions richer, despite claiming in the beginning of the pandemic, we're doing this for the good of humanity. We're not even going to make any money off of this, you guys. It's for the good of humanity. Wow, did that turn out to not be the case? And so did other major corporations. They benefited. So money and power have effectively become more centralized, and power and rights of ordinary Americans has meanwhile weakened. And was that an accidental, like just happenstance outcome? Or was that an intentional outcome? Does it matter? I mean, it matters, but I think what matters more is that it happened, that is the result. And that is, to me, dangerous rhetoric. Moving on, though, from COVID, which y'all know that I can talk about all day long, crime, because there are other progressive crises in this world, progressive-driven crises. Crime. So the rhetoric has been, maybe not so much now, it's being backtracked. Now we're refunding the police because it's gone so terribly, but defund the police was major progressive rhetoric for a while. Police are the bad guys. To support the police, you are supporting racism. They're not to be trusted. Any incidents of police misconduct got projected onto the entire police population, regardless of individuals or the facts. Results really speak for themselves. I'm just going to highlight a few cities here. So is it a shock to anybody that crime has increased overall in the U.S. and as our police force has been weakened? So homicides in Oakland, California, this was just as of late 2021, by the way, had risen 314% compared with the same time last year. Law enforcement has seen a 113% increase in firearms assaults. Violent crime surged in Minneapolis, and murders have risen by 46%. Minneapolis had, at this point, shifted roughly $8 million of their budget away from the police. Murders have tripled from July 2020 to February 2021 in Portland, where city commissioners voted to cut nearly $16 million from the police budget. New York City saw about, let's see here, they had slashed about $1 billion from the police budget. Murders soared. Los Angeles, same thing. They recorded a 38% increase in murders and a 28% increase in murders the next year. They had cut their department's budget by 150 million. So just case after case after case. Who's responsible? So in a report, I find this interesting. So in a report by the Manhattan Institute, who's actually most likely to support defunding the police and push for that? It's actually white Democrats. It's white Democrats. The theories behind this include, for one, they're insulated from the bad results because white people, white Democrats specifically, are less likely to live in kind of the inner cities and the areas that are more disproportionately impacted negatively by lower police budgets and support. And according to this report, based on, I'm not exactly sure how this survey was conducted, but they feel like essentially they're saying it's white guilt because they feel like if they support defund the police, they're doing something, albeit counterproductive, very counterproductive, to fix what they're being told is a racist system of oppression that is law enforcement. So we're playing on people's shame and guilt and pain and leveraging that to get support for a progressive rhetoric, which is defund the police. Immigration is the other one I want to talk about because I think that this is a huge one right now. The rhetoric has been, even people who I've listened to people who, even hearing some of the immigration numbers and what a crisis we have at our borders right now, and not even at our borders, it's permeating the whole country at this point. But open borders is more inclusive, right? Things like building a wall, border security, kind of more conservative policies around immigration is racist, right? We're told, they don't fall into that trap of, painting immigrants as criminals and drug dealers and rapists. Like, that is so racist. It's so not inclusive. Most illegal immigrants just want the American dream. Like, that's the picture that you're sold, is that people are just, it's families, holding hands, coming across the border, with their suitcase, and they're just looking for a better life, which I'm sure I want to believe is the case in many cases. But the reality, I think reality is so much more important than rhetoric here, because we have had economic overwhelm in our country. We have fed the drug crisis and fentanyl overdoses. We have fueled the human traffic industry. So first of all, let's start here. The trip for migrants is dangerous. If you immigrate illegally, it is dangerous. So many murders, kidnappings, rapes happen along the way. In an article for the Huffington Post, it was reported that an estimated 80% of Central American women and girls are raped as they try to enter the United States. Human rights experts estimate that 10,000 undocumented immigrants are kidnapped every year during their passage through Mexico. It is a dangerous trip. It's not good for illegal migrants either. It's not humane to have open borders from that standpoint alone, but let's keep going. Human trafficking, so forced labor, sex trafficking, and other offenses, has been soaring. I'm going to do an entire episode where I dive into the specifics of each of these. So that's why in this episode, I'm just highlighting some of these, because I promise I'm going to dive into the next episode into immigration and prove exactly what I'm saying ad infinitum. But one trafficker just said, and is quoted in an article talking about the reality that has happened, and this is just one former trafficker, that juvenile organs fetch high prices for cartels, and that the deceased children's bodies, this one's hard to talk about, are often filled with illicit drugs and smuggled into the United States using the corpse as a form of protection against detection. It is not good for illegal migrants to be coming into this country. I grew up in a town that was over 70-something% Mexican immigrant population. I have a heart for immigrants. I just met an immigrant family from Romania out in Walmart the other day. Believe it's, my job to be hospitable and to help people. Illegal immigration isn't good for legal immigration either. by the way. Our system is clogged. There's a backlog of an estimated 1.9 million cases right now, I think was the latest number I saw. So just imagine what a detriment that is to legal immigration and how clogged and overwhelmed our system is. Our resources are completely tied up, basically trying to stifle a total humanitarian crisis at this point. Also, highest levels of drug overdoses in U.S. history, and fentanyl overdose is now the leading cause of death in adults 18 to 45, at more than 1,400 deaths per week. It's one of the leading causes of death now. By the way, rainbow fentanyl is a new thing. It looks like candy, apparently. It's hit the U.S., and literally 2-year-olds are overdosing from fentanyl. That is literally happening in the United States of America, is toddlers are overdosing on fentanyl. So there's this whole school of thought that is like, oh, drug addicts are addicted. They're going to figure out how to get drugs anyway. Oh, even if you shut down the borders, they're going to figure out how to get it in. That's like saying, oh, you can leave your front door unlocked at night because, if somebody really wants to break into your house, they're going to break into your house. Yeah, but they're going to have to freaking break through a locked door in my house because my number one job is protecting my family. I definitely, surely want to teach my children hospitality, and I want that to be a value in our home, is being hospitable, is being gracious to guests, is being generous, is making our home a welcoming place, but I lock my door because my number one job is to protect my family. I have the security sign that we all put in our yards, isn't for aesthetics. It isn't, to make it look welcoming and inclusive. It's there to let people know I'm going to protect my family. And as U.S. elected officials, their number one priority should be protecting the American people. And here, we're not even talking about just protecting American people. We're talking about protecting people, period. This border crisis is insane. The numbers are insane. I can't wait to dig way more into them. It's going to be super depressing. It'll be so much fun for us to go through it together. Who benefits? I'm going to talk about, who benefits from this rhetoric and this influx of migrants into the U.S. I'm going to go into more ways because it's obviously more complex than like a single, you can't really look at it through a single lens. But one interesting kind of interest that is tied up here that I want to kind of highlight here just to continue our theme of who, in general, progressive agenda benefits. Believe it or not, big banks, big tech. I'm in particular going to pick on big banks here because Joe Biden has been affectionately called Bank of America Joe. He has a long-standing track record in the Senate of supporting credit card companies and, credit card companies and Wall Street and big banks. Vote after vote after vote, he has shown his hand. It's why they donated crazy amounts to his 2020 campaign. It's why big banks, what's she called? The Treasury Secretary has pocketed millions of dollars from big banks in speaking engagement and lobby money. Make no mistake, big banks have Joe Biden and the Democrats in their back pockets. Why are they such huge fans of open borders? Lower wages, cheap labor costs, it benefits their bottom line. More consumers in the market to prey upon and take advantage of. It's an ideal scenario for a lot of big companies, big industries, I should say, but big banks in particular. Now, mind you, do not be confused. Do not be led astray. Joe Biden will, here's his cover, and it's a great strategy if you don't see through it. He will pop off in speech here and there, throw in a policy here that seems to oh, we're going to get those big banks. In the same way that, remember last episode I talked about him doing with Big Pharma. We beat Big Pharma. Oh, we're going to get them. Yes, I pocketed more money from them than literally any politician. They benefited billions and billions from my policies and my support for their products. But, oh, we're going to get them. We're going to take this 10 symbolic lists of Medicare drugs and we're going to, cap the prices. We're going to decrease the prices 10 out of who knows how many big pharma drugs. And he'll say the same thing with big banks. Like there will be a policy that proposes tax hikes for big banks, and analyses will show, oh, overall, like the offsetting of his other policies and how they're going to benefit big banks is like they're going to be sitting pretty. They're not only not going to be effective, but they're going to be like better off under Biden's policies. But he'll still say in a speech here and there, like he'll pop off on big banks and beat his chest about how, oh, we're beating, the Wall Street and blah blah blah. Because remember, he's for blue collar workers. He's for middle class Americans, right? He can't like cozy up publicly to the financial sector and big banks, but he is. He is. And the rhetoric is just a front. It's just a front. This is my problem. This is why I have left the Progressive Party. It's a front. It's a lie. Your values are being exploited. Your emotions are being exploited. And this isn't just true with the progressive agenda, I realize. But that's what I'm talking about on this podcast. I was going to go into the economy. Maybe I'll save that for another. Look, the reality is just when our economy is doing better, people do better. Poverty is lower, crime is lower, homelessness is down, addiction is down, jobs are better, mental health is better. And progressive policies continue to weaken our economy. Biden's policies have continued to weaken our economy. We're in hyperinflation isn't, we're almost certainly going to see a global recession driven by the United States recession, by the way. But meanwhile, $10,000 of canceled student debt. Are we going to touch the issue of predatory lending and make bankruptcy actually clear you of student debt so it stops eating into people's social security because they still owe student? Are we going to do any of that? No. I mean, Biden, you guys, has voted against legislation that required credit card companies to simply, as a senator, he did this, to simply make it clear to people how detrimental paying only the minimum payment would be to them financially and to their credit. He voted against that. This guy doesn't care about middle class America. He doesn't care about blue collar workers. It's a front. But I digress. But you can come in and say, oh, we canceled $10,000 in student debts, because they aren't stupid. They know that that's going to matter to some people and serve as a good cover, because they can come in now that they've weakened the economy and weakened America and say, we are the saviors of America. What are you talking about? We're pumping all of this money into the economy, like relief bills. We're canceling $10,000 in student debt. See, we're the saviors of the issue that we caused. And I can't even go into war right now. I told you, it's pick a crisis. It's like, what do you want to see? The dumpster fire in Ukraine? You want to see the dumpster fire at the border? The dumpster fire of our economy? Which one do you want to talk about? But war, and this is both sides of, not just the Progressive Party, both sides are together on this one. But what's the rhetoric? We're spreading freedom and democracy. No, mind you, that our defense budget is in the trillions when we're at war. When there's threat at war, it goes way, way up, and it benefits, weapons companies and government contractors. I'm going to have to go into war on a later episode. I'm going to have to go into something that I can only begin to scratch the surface of and begin to understand. And I'm not a dumb person. I'm a pretty intelligent person, but this issue of war is so, so nuanced. But it does make me kind of chuckle that we talk about, we boil the Ukraine down to spreading freedom. Can we get some of ours back in the US before we start talking about spreading it? I'm not an expert or anything, but I feel like you have to have the thing before you can give it away to other people. But I don't know, that's just me. So you guys, in my opinion, and it's why I'm not a liberal anymore, because traditional liberalism has been hijacked. It's been hijacked by a very specific left-winged political agenda. It's ideologically driven, and they're using progressive ideology to drown out the actual issues and the actual facts of their policies and the results of those policies. Reality over rhetoric, please, because all this does is effectively, it continues to increase their power, and it continues to benefit their elite corporate constituents. Okay, so I guess I've promised an episode on immigration and an episode on war. I don't know what I was thinking, but I've made those promises, so I'll make good on them. And yeah, come at you in the future with my very best attempt at both of those. All right. Thanks for joining me.